This is the story of how I made them pay, and I want to start at the end because the beginning is too quiet to believe. I was sitting in my truck outside Mercy General on a Tuesday night in late November, engine running, heater going full blast, watching my daughter through the window of the third-floor room. She didn't know I was there yet. She was sitting up in the hospital bed talking to a nurse, and she smiled at something the nurse said. Not a big smile, just a small, careful one, the kind you make when you're still not sure you're allowed to feel okay. That smile broke me open in a way that nothing else had. Not the argument, not the evidence, not even what I found when I walked up to that front door 3 weeks earlier. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to Thanksgiving. I retired from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in 2019 after 31 years. I tell you that not to brag, but because it matters. For 3 decades, I followed money. I learned how people hide things, assets, income, intentions. I learned that the most dangerous liars aren't the ones who sweat and stammer. They're the ones who smile and offer you a drink. My son-in-law's family were those kinds of liars. My daughter Cecily met her husband. I'll call him by his name, which is Forrest, because he doesn't deserve the protection of anonymity anymore, at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital downtown. She was 34. He was 38. She called me the night they met and said, "Dad, he's different." She used that word a lot in those early months. Different. I liked Forrest well enough at first. He was polished, quiet, the kind of man who listened when you talked and made you feel heard. His family was old money. Not obscene, just comfortable. His father had built a small regional bank in the Carolinas before selling it. His mother, a woman named Dara, had the posture of someone who'd spent her whole life deciding who was worth her time and who wasn't. She decided early that Cecily wasn't worth hers. Cecily never told me the details. She edited things when she talked to me, took out the parts that would have made me angry, smoothed the edges. I understood why. She loved her husband, and she knew what I was capable of when I got my back up. She was protecting everyone at once the way daughters sometimes do when they're caught between the men they love and the women who resent them. But I'm a man who spent 30 years reading between lines. I saw it anyway. Thanksgiving that year fell on the 28th. Cecily and Forrest had been married 4 years. They'd been trying for a baby for 2. She'd told me quietly in October, just me, not her mother, who passed 8 years ago, that she was 9 weeks pregnant. She said she was scared to get excited. She'd had one early loss the year before, and she carried it carefully. This new pregnancy, the way you carry something that could break. The plan was for them to drive up to Adara's house in Wilmington for Thanksgiving. Forrest's family had been doing it for 40 years. Same house, same table, same crystal glasses that nobody was allowed to actually enjoy. Cecily had asked if I wanted to come. I said no. I'd been to one of those dinners before, and once was enough. I told her to call me when she got there. She called me at 6:30 on Wednesday evening the night before. She sounded fine, a little tired, a little nervous. Said the drive was good. Said Adara had made up the guest room. I didn't hear from her again until Friday afternoon, and by then everything was already done. The call came at 2:30. It was Forrest, not Cecily, which was the first thing wrong. "I think you should come," he said. "Cecily isn't feeling well." That's all he said. Not what kind of not well. Not where she was. Not whether she needed a doctor. I asked him directly. "Has she seen a doctor?" "She's pregnant, Forrest. If something's wrong, she needs to be seen." He said she was resting, and he was sure it was just stress and the long drive. I asked to speak to her. He said she was asleep. I got in my truck. Wilmington is 3 hours from me on a good day. I hit the road at 3 and made it by 6:15. The whole way down, I kept calling his cell. He answered twice, told me she was fine, told me I didn't need to come. I kept driving. Adara's house is on a cul-de-sac off Oleander Drive, a big brick colonial with black shutters and a circular driveway. When I pulled up, every light in the house was blazing. I could hear music through the walls. I could see shadows moving past the windows in the dining room. Cecily was on the front porch. She was sitting on the top step with her knees pulled to her chest, still in the blouse she'd driven down in. She had nothing over her shoulders. No coat, no blanket. It was 41 degrees. I know because I checked my truck thermometer when I pulled in. I got to her in about 3 steps. She looked up at me and the expression on her face. I've carried it with me every day since. Not surprise, not relief, just this hollowed-out look like she'd already made her peace with being cold and was startled to discover that someone had noticed. "Dad," she said. That was all. I got my jacket off and around her shoulders before she finished the word. I pulled her against my chest and I felt her shaking. Not dramatically, just this fine tremor that told me she'd been out there long enough for her body to stop fighting it. I held her tight and I made myself stay calm because she needed calm from me right then, not what I actually felt. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. She shook her head slightly. "A while." "Are you bleeding? Any cramping? Talk to me." "No, just cold." I pulled back and looked at her face, pale, lips a shade too light. I put my hand against her forehead. She didn't have a fever, which told me the cold had already normalized her temperature. "We're going to the hospital," I said. "Dad, I don't want to make a scene. I'm not asking." I got her to my truck. I turned the heat up as high as it would go and I called 911 because I wanted documentation, not because I couldn't drive her myself. I wanted a record. 31 years in criminal investigation had made me understand the value of paper before anything else. The dispatcher asked about her condition and I gave it clearly. Pregnant, 9 weeks, exposed to cold temperatures for unknown duration. Currently stable, but her color was off and she'd been shivering. The paramedics met us at the Cape Fear Valley ER entrance. Cecily protested the whole way, soft protests, apologizing to me as if she was the one who'd done something wrong. "That's the part I keep coming back to," she kept saying. "I don't want to cause trouble." She'd been sitting on that porch in 41 degrees and she was worried about causing trouble. The ER doctor checked her over thoroughly. Baby was fine. Heartbeat strong. No sign of distress. They warmed her up, got her blood pressure back to where it needed to be, and the doctor noted in the chart that she had been exposed to prolonged cold stress. All of it documented. All of it on record. While the nurses were with her, I stepped into the hallway and I called Forrest. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the party in the background. "She's at Cape Fear Valley," I said. "ER. A pause. "Is she okay?" "The baby is fine. She is fine. No thanks to you or anyone in that house." Another pause. "Dad, I can explain." "I'm not your dad," I said, "and you don't need to explain anything to me tonight. But I want you to understand something very clearly. Tomorrow, when she is stable and warm and ready to talk, I am going to want answers. And I have 31 years of knowing when someone is lying to me." I hung up. The answers came in pieces. They always do. Cecily told me some of it that night, in a quiet voice, while the IV drip ran and the monitors beeped, and I sat in the chair beside her bed. The dinner had gone wrong before it started. She'd mentioned to Adara over the hors d'oeuvres that she was queasy. The pregnancy was still making her nauseous in the evenings. Adara had looked at her and said very calmly that perhaps Cecily should step outside for some air. She'd said it in the way that some women of a certain generation say things, not as a suggestion, but as a verdict. Cecily had gone outside. She'd meant to step out for 5 minutes. Forrest had seen her from the window at some point and had not come out. His brother had seen her and had not come out. His sister-in-law had seen her and had not come out. At one point, someone had drawn the curtain on the window facing the porch. She had been out there for over 2 hours. She didn't try the front door because she'd heard the lock engage. She told me this so quietly I almost missed it. I asked her to say it again, and she did. Someone had locked the front door while she was on the porch. I sat with that for a moment. "Did you call Forrest?" I asked. "I called him twice. He texted back that the dinner was going long and he'd come get me soon." "Soon," I repeated. "I know," she said. "I'm not a man who acts without thinking. I spent my career building cases, slow, methodical, airtight. Impulsive actions make gaps that lawyers crawl through. So I did not drive back to Oleander Drive that night and do what every nerve in my body wanted me to do. Instead, I sat with my daughter until she fell asleep, and then I went down to the parking garage and I made a list. The list was everything I already knew and everything I needed to find out. I knew Adara had controlling interest in a family real estate holding company, the kind of vehicle that old Carolina money parks itself in. I knew Forrest had been gifted a portion of that interest as a wedding present. I knew that Cecily was not a beneficiary of any of it, and that she had signed a prenuptial agreement at Adara's insistence that was moderately favorable to Forrest. What I didn't know yet was what Adara's estate planning looked like, or whether Forrest had been putting anything in Cecily's name, or what the holding company's filing history showed. I knew where to look. I want to be precise about what happened next, because some of what I'm about to say sounds dramatic when you say it fast, and I need you to understand that it wasn't dramatic. It was just methodical. The way it always is. I had contacts. 31 years in federal law enforcement builds a network, and I wasn't above using it. One of my old colleagues had gone into private practice as a forensic accountant. I called him the Saturday after Thanksgiving and outlined the situation. He agreed to pull public records, property filings, LLC registrations, UCC filings, anything public, nothing that required a warrant, because I wasn't law enforcement anymore and I wasn't going to pretend I was. What came back over the next 2 weeks was interesting. The holding company, Aldercrest Properties, LLC, had been restructured 8 months earlier. Prior to that restructuring, Forrest held a 12% interest. After it, he held 4%. His share had been diluted without compensation, quietly, in a filing that most people would have needed a CPA to read. Also interesting, Adara had added 2 names to the LLC's membership agreement in that same restructuring. Not Forrest. His brother and his brother's wife. Forrest did not know. I was almost certain of it when I read the filing, and I became completely certain of it the day I sat down across from him at a Panera in Wilmington and watched his face while I explained what I'd found. He went the color of old newspaper. That can't be right," he said. "It's right," I said. "It's in the public record. You can look it up yourself." He stared at the papers I'd put in front of him for a long time. Then he looked up at me with something complicated in his expression, part anger, part shame, and underneath both of those things, something younger and more lost. "She never told me," he said. "No," I said, "she didn't." I'm not going to pretend that conversation fixed everything. It didn't. Cecily and Forrest had a lot of work ahead of them, some of which they did together, some of which they ended up doing apart. That's their story to tell, and not mine. What I will tell you is what happened with Adara. She called me 3 days after my conversation with Forrest. I don't know who told her. Probably Forrest himself, or maybe she had someone watching the LLC filings for exactly this kind of thing. She called from a number I didn't recognize, a landline, and when I answered, she said, "This is Adara. I think we should speak." I agreed. She asked if I intended to take legal action. I told her I was considering my options. She said that she felt the events of Thanksgiving had been unfortunate and that she hoped we could resolve things quietly. I said, "Adara, my daughter sat on your porch in 41-degree weather for over 2 hours while you and your family ate dinner. She is 9 weeks pregnant. That visit to the emergency room is documented. The exposure is documented. The nursing notes are documented. And the LLC restructuring that cut your son out of his inheritance without his knowledge, that's documented too. So, when you say you want to resolve things quietly, I want to understand what quiet looks like to you." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" she finally said. I want Cecily removed from the prenuptial agreement's asset forfeiture clause, I said. I want a written acknowledgement of what occurred on Thanksgiving. Not a legal admission. I'm not asking for that, but a written acknowledgement within the family. And I want you to have a conversation with your son about what you did to his inheritance. Another pause. Longer this time. And if I don't, she said, then I refer the Thanksgiving incident to a family law attorney and let them advise Cecily on her options. And I provide the LLC restructuring documents to Forrest's attorney and let him advise Forrest on his. I'm not threatening you, Adara. I'm just telling you what the next steps look like from where I'm standing. She said she'd call me back. She called back in 4 hours. Her attorney and Cecily's attorney hammered out the prenuptial amendment over the following 3 weeks. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was substantial, and more importantly, it was signed. I found out about the family conversation, the one between Adara and Forrest, secondhand from Cecily, who found out from Forrest himself. Apparently, Adara had told him it was a business decision, that she'd had to protect the majority interest, that he would understand when he was older. He was 42. Forrest told Cecily that he'd sat in his mother's living room and listened to her explain why she'd cut him out of his own inheritance, and at the end of it he'd stood up, thanked her for the coffee, and walked out. He hadn't spoken to her since. I don't feel good about that. I don't feel bad about it either. It was his choice, made with his own eyes open, and that's all you can ask. Cecily's daughter was born the following July. 7 pounds 2 ounces, lungs, that announced themselves to the entire maternity ward within 4 seconds of arrival. I was in the waiting room when she came. Forrest came out to get me after, face damp, wearing the expression of a man who just had the world rearranged around him. He grabbed my hand in both of his and said something I won't repeat because it was between the two of us. I'll just say it was enough. I went in to see Cecily. She was tired in a way I'd never seen her, deep, cellular tired, and she was more herself than she'd been in years. She had the baby on her chest. I sat in the chair beside the bed, same chair, different hospital. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, sweetheart. We didn't talk about Thanksgiving. We didn't talk about Adara, or the prenuptial agreement, or the LLC. There was a baby on her chest, and there was nothing else in the world that mattered." I drove home that evening along the coast highway, windows down despite the heat. I'm 63 years old. I've worked corruption cases and fraud schemes in one situation involving a church deacon that I still can't talk about publicly. I've seen people do terrible things to each other for money, for pride, for the simple pleasure of making someone smaller than themselves. Adara didn't invent cruelty. She just practiced it the way people do when they've never once been held accountable for it. Casually, almost absently. The way you swat a fly without looking up from whatever you're doing. She looked up this time. I'm not a man who celebrates, but I'll tell you this much. I drove that coast highway home with the windows down and the Atlantic on my right and my granddaughter in the world, and somewhere around the Wright Brothers Memorial I thought, yeah, that's enough. That's how it was supposed to go. I pulled into my driveway a little after 9. The porch light was on. I'd left it on when I drove out 3 weeks earlier on a Friday afternoon because a man named Forrest had called me and said my daughter wasn't feeling well. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a while. Then I went inside and called Cecily to say goodnight. I keep thinking about that porch step, not the argument afterward, not the legal paperwork, not even Adara's voice on the phone when she finally asked what I wanted. I keep thinking about Cecily sitting on that cold concrete step with her knees pulled to her chest, apologizing to me for causing trouble. That's the image I return to. That's the one that tells me everything I need to know about how we raise people to shrink themselves for the comfort of others. She had been out there 2 hours. She still thought she was the problem. I've spent a lot of time in my life around people who did wrong things and knew it. That's what 31 years in federal investigation gives you. Not cynicism, exactly, but a kind of clarity about human nature. People who cause harm rarely announce it. They just quietly arrange the world so that the person they're hurting has no easy way out. A locked door, an unanswered text, a curtain drawn across a window. None of it dramatic. All of it deliberate. What I want to say, and I mean this for anyone watching who recognizes something in this story, is that doing right by someone you love is not always loud. It's not always a confrontation or a courtroom or a phone call that ends with someone crying. Sometimes it's just getting in your truck and driving 3 hours because something in your chest says go. That instinct, that refusal to look away when looking away would be easier. I think that's the foundation of a decent life, not perfection, not the absence of anger, just the willingness to show up when it costs you something. The intelligence part came later, not book intelligence, practical intelligence. Knowing which records to pull, knowing that what happened on that porch needed to be documented before it became a he said, she said, knowing that Adar's real leverage wasn't cruelty, it was money, and money leaves tracks. I didn't win anything with emotion. I won it by being methodical when every nerve in my body wanted to be otherwise. That discipline, the ability to think clearly when you're furious, is something I wish I could hand to people wholesale. It took me decades to develop it. It's worth more than most things I own. And Cecily, I want to talk about Cecily because she's the one who actually did the hardest thing in this whole story. She didn't leave the marriage in anger. She didn't blow everything up. She held her ground through months of uncertainty while her husband figured out who he was going to be. That kind of endurance, the ability to stay present in a painful situation without either collapsing or going numb, that's not passive. That's one of the strongest things a person can do. She carried a pregnancy and a fractured family and a legal process, and she came out the other side with her dignity intact. I couldn't have managed it at her age. I'm not sure I could manage it now. The baby is 8 months old. She has her mother's eyes and apparently her grandfather's stubbornness, which her mother claims is not a compliment, but says with a smile, "Some debts don't get repaid. Some people never fully reckon with what they've done." Adara signed the paperwork and went back to her house on Oleander Drive, and I suspect she told herself a version of events that made her the reasonable one. That's how it usually goes. But Cecily has a document now that protects her. Forrest knows what his family did to his inheritance and made his own choice about what to do with that knowledge, and I have a granddaughter who is going to grow up in a house where the doors don't get locked against her. That's not everything, but it's enough to sleep on.